The everlasting debate in the movie industry or any art-related industry on money versus artistic integrity is something that has always haunted fans of good filmmaking. You see, movies are product, and the movie industry is a business, a huge one. Movies cost money, a whole bunch of it, and they must make money so they can keep making films. That's just how it works, not just in the movie industry, but in any industry. So it is not unusual that fans of beloved franchises have to suffer through unnecessary additional seasons of their favorite TV shows and unnecessary sequels to their favorite movie that often compromise and even ruins the stories and the artistic vision their creators had for its original iteration. The original Halloween, its troubled sequel,
Halloween 2 is an abomination and a horrible movie.
and the shit show the franchise would later become are a perfect example of this conflict. John Carpenter agreed to take on the project as long as he had full creative control over the film. The result was the birth of the slasher film as a horror subgenre, and the basic plot of the original Halloween is, to this day, boilerplate for the genre. The movie was a massive box office success and prompted a sequel that Carpenter did not want to do,
An abomination and a horrible movie.
and reluctantly wrote but didn't direct because he wanted as little to do with it as possible. Halloween 2 is as close as it gets to the exact same movie but with more gore and deaths and less tension, with the director Rick Rosenthal trying as hard as possible to emulate everything from the previous installment. And the problem is not that he fails, but that he succeeds. It's almost another version of the same movie that came out 3 years before. The plot includes an unnecessary connection between Laurie and Michael Myers in order to explain why he wanted to kill her in part 1.
That Strode girl, that's Michael Myers' sister.
And there is an interesting parallel to be made here. Halloween 1 has everything that makes the slasher genre good: the setting, the masked killer, the tension, the fear of the unknown, the killings themselves. While Halloween 2 has everything that can make the genre silly: too many deaths, overly sadistic killings, over-the-top gore, and a stupid, unnecessary explanation for the killings. It is a studio film that only exists because of the business side of filmmaking and serves no purpose but to tarnish the legacy of the first one. We didn't need to know why Michael kills, and we certainly didn't need to see the definite end of Michael Myers. This goes directly against what makes the first one so efficient and scary: the senseless nature and randomness of the killings, and Michael Myers vanishing at the end with Loomis staring into the night. This scene is supposed to mean that evil's out there, lurking in the shadows. It can be anywhere, in any shape or form. It can be just around the corner from anyone. You never know. Except now we do know. And the fact that we now know undermines the first one tremendously. After Halloween 2, they decided to make the franchise into an anthology for the third one, then backed out of it and wrote a bunch of bullshit for the next 3. They made the other 2 sequels that ignored 4, 5, and 6, and tried to mimic movies that mimicked the original Halloween and rebooted it once with Rob Zombie. The only thing constant about this fucking train wreck of a franchise is that they never managed to do a sequel worth a damn for the original. So Rob Zombie passed on the third movie, which at first was supposed to be 3D, and the sequel eventually landed on David Gordon Green and Danny McBride. McBride and Gordon Green, according to themselves, were
big Halloween fans,
and this brings us to the main subject of the video. You see, the business side of the film industry often left fans frustrated because the material would often be given to people who either didn't care about it or people who didn't get it.
It's the hockey team from hell!
But in this era of franchise revivals, we have something we never had before. People who grew up on these stories are on the industry themselves, both in front and behind the camera. And then we came to this wonderful time when fans of the original material who felt wronged by studio greed could actually make worthy sequels for their favorite franchises once ruined by poor studio handling in the past. And that's great, right? I mean, if you give the movie to real fans, it can't go wrong, right?
Oh shit!
Jesus. McBride and Gordon Green came out with some bullshit that they would only do the movie if Carpenter himself approved their pitch. Carpenter, who was attached to the project as an executive producer, said he came back to help to try to make the 10th sequel the scariest of them all. He also said he was impressed by the duo's pitch and that he approved their idea because they get it. The movie would ignore all sequels because at this point, who the fuck cares, right? In all honesty, who the fuck cares really? Even if the franchise weren't already a giant fucking mess, no one cares about what happened after part 1 and maybe part 2. The only other marginally good movie is the third one, and it has nothing to do with the original idea. Anyway, they said they would ignore everything, even the last scene from the first movie, because they were making the definitive sequel to the franchise. They said they were fans. Let's see how that turned out, shall we? So the movie opens with two
investigative journalists.
making a
podcast.
visiting Michael Myers at the mental institution he's held at. His latest psychiatrist, Dr. gives us the obligatory Michael Myers, he's pure evil introduction amidst the useless filler.
It pains me to see him transferred to that less than desirable facility.
Why? You just said the man is pure evil.
He can speak. He just chooses not to.
How do you know that? Then they get to a courtyard where Myers and other prisoners are chained to the ground. The man then grabs the mask, which he
I borrowed from a friend, the Attorney General.
and holds it to the mindless killer in the hopes that he shows some kind of reaction to the white piece of rubber. This bullshit teasing coming from this dude makes perfect sense because these hacks are trying to make a sensationalist
Podcast.
about the Halloween killings 30 years ago. The problem is that the movie starts to get into it. The scene is played out as if there really is a connection, as if there really is some sort of supernatural bond between Myers and the mask. We're not even 10 minutes into the film and this is already the start of what makes this and so many other revivals so infuriating. Cut to opening credits and the
Journalists.
are on their way to see an elderly Laurie Strode while recording voiceover for their
Podcast.
still trying to imply meaning to the story. Laurie is then introduced after what I guess was an attempt at humor with them giving her money for the interview. They then sit down and talk through a horribly written exposition scene where the dialogue feels so disjointed it makes me think there are lines from several versions of the scene that made the cut. Then we meet Laurie's daughter Karen, granddaughter Allie, and the worst character in the history of movies.
Oh man, I got peanut butter on my penis.
Ew, Dad.
Seriously, I'm not a fan of Jenny McBride's comedy. It is incomprehensible to me. I have a real incapacity of understanding most of his jokes to the point where it doesn't make sense to me that this man made his name on comedy. I have no idea if this asshole is supposed to be funny, obnoxious, dumb, or if he's supposed to be funny because he's dumb and or obnoxious. One thing I do know though, this is not a comedy film. This is supposed to be the true Halloween sequel, the sequel to the dark, atmospheric film that defined the slasher horror subgenre. Out of all intellectual properties you could try to shoehorn comedy in, this is probably the worst one. The family then has some exposition in a dialogue on par with the previous one, and we are shown Allie going to school with her friends, because reference. And this scene is important because the dialogue summarizes almost every single conversation in this movie. It is either bad exposition,
I mean, that is scary to have a bunch of your friends get butchered by some random crazy person.
Is it though?
filler,
All things considered, there's a lot worse stuff that's happening today, and like, I mean, what, a couple people getting killed by one guy with a knife is not that big of a deal.
reference to the old movies,
Wasn't it her brother who like cold-blooded murdered all those teenagers?
No.
or a combination of the three. But watch her. You say, there's nothing wrong with the exposition. Sure, there's nothing wrong with the exposition, but you can do it right, or at least a little better. This is shit. This is characters delivering random information to the audience instead of having something that even remotely resembles a real conversation. Then Laurie and Allie have one of the few good dialogues in the movie where Allie says Laurie's paranoia has cost her her life and her family. Laurie spent her entire life obsessing over Michael Myers' eventual return. And this, right here, is what makes this film so frustrating. This is a good idea. This is a great idea. It's not original or anything, but you can have a great dramatic horror story with this premise. The failed marriages, Laurie's and Carrie's strained relationship, Laurie's alienation towards her granddaughter, and all of it wrapping up at the end with a nice little message about opening up and relying on your loved ones to face the traumas and life challenges. Or some shit like that. I don't know, I'm not a writer. But watch her! You interrupt me again, thinking I have nothing better to do other than to answer your imaginary gotchas. This is not that kind of movie. It's just a dumb slasher film. Well, then don't come out with that definitive sequel bullshit just to make the same shit that has been done over and over again. Look, people have to understand that slasher films are not supposed to be silly. They're supposed to be legit horror movies. Scary ones. The subgenre ended up becoming silly because of the sheer number of entries over the years. There's no way around it. Whenever you make too much of anything, you will invariably build up fatigue and end up spinning your wheels to come up with something new until you cross the line into ridiculousness territory because you start to run out of reasonable ways of making your story unique. You basically run out of plausible ways of killing stupid teenagers. We then go to a nice montage with voiceover from Dr. Loomis that gives us the only exposition we actually need about Myers. As a matter of fact, the movie could have opened with this. We didn't even need these two assholes. Then we go to a family dinner full of shitty filler dialogue. Then Laurie appears and makes a scene. Then Karen goes,
I'm glad you got to see that.
got to see what?
I never told you how I spent my childhood.
You're telling me that this almost 20 years old girl had never seen her grandmother act the traits that define her entire being and never knew how her mother's childhood was? The movie itself challenges that claim.
All this hiding, all this preparation, it was for nothing. I mean, it took priority over your family. It cost you your family.
If the way I raised your mother means that she hates me, but that she's prepared for the horrors of this world, then I can live with that.
If she didn't know anything about this, then what the fuck was this scene all about? Anyway, we go to the escape scene and these two characters are having some filler dialogue about the kid liking his dance classes. What the f... Upon rewatching the movie, I guess this was supposed to be a joke, but the only reason I find it remotely funny is because of the wondering on why the fuck is this dialogue even on the movie. It's like they went out of their way to make almost every dialogue as pointless as possible. Really, I'm not being hyperbolic. It really feels that way. These are professionals. This is a Hollywood film. You can't write dialogue this bad by accident. There are people hired to prevent this from happening. Professionals! Then reference happens, Myers kills a kid, Doctor is rescued by Officer Radcon, and look, it's Halloween! We then see the
Journalists?
visiting Judith's grave, and the lady says,
And this is our only claim to fame.
wait, why her? What about the Halloween night with 4 deaths? I mean, 5, because he killed the dog too. The motherfucker killed the fucking dog. Did they forget about that? Well, that is a very, very good question that they don't bother to answer because the dialogue in this movie doesn't have to make any sense. And then we have more exposition that could have easily been placed on Lumi's montage about Myers. Then this cartoon character shows up and delivers some filler and Radcon says,
A2201. It's Michael Myers. Babysitter murders, 1978.
You see why I say this screenplay looks like a fucking Frankenstein of different drafts? In the very previous scene, Haddonfield's only claim to fame was Judith Myers' murder. But now Officer Radcon references the babysitter murders to identify Myers because of reference. And in case you didn't know, the original title for the original Halloween was The Babysitter Murders. And this name doesn't even make sense in the final version of the script because Myers only kills one babysitter on that movie. But then the cartoon character just brushes it off.
What are we gonna do? Cancel Halloween?
Well, that would be a pretty good start, don't you think? Maybe at least put some sort of warning about the serial killer on the loose in your town. No? Alright. Then we go to a gas station where Michael Myers, God knows how, managed to track down the
Journalists?
And this is where things start to get really bad. He kills a mechanic and takes his dark blue overalls and then proceeds to kill the... Okay, enough of that. And then goes to that trunk and gets the mask. And the film goes crazy with it. Like this is some sort of prophecy. Like this mask or these overalls mean anything. Like the mindless killer has some sort of attachment to the attire. And I say that this is where things start to get really bad because before we had a traumatized lady that irrationally feared for her safety and these two hacks who knew what they were doing to sell the story. But now the movie goes with it. Nothing that happens in this gas station makes any sense. It makes no sense that Myers found these two. It makes no sense that he would kill the mechanic and get the overalls. It makes no sense that he would then kill them to get the mask, and it makes no sense that he kills 4 people violently in broad daylight in a busy gas station and no one notices or hears anything. This is where the movie once and for all abandons all logic and any kind of integrity it might have had in attempting to make a legit sequel to the original Halloween. This is the point where the movie breaks and becomes a mere dumb, nostalgia-filled piece of garbage. We then go to Karen's house, where we are supposed to believe that this
I have tried to protect you and prepare you. Now we have to hunt him down.
is the same traumatized elderly woman who a few scenes back was losing her shit over the thought of Michael Myers escaping. But now that he has escaped, she's ready for action and Karen keeps saying,
The world is not a dark and evil place. It is full of love and understanding.
and this is so confusing to me. Because we were already taught that Karen was trained, and the flashback showed us that the training was a lot like Laurie's. They never say it in the movie, but I think it's only reasonable for one to assume that she trained Karen to face Myers, right? There's absolutely nothing in the film that implies otherwise. Then why she keeps saying shit like this? Yes, Karen, the world may not be a dark and evil place, but fucking Michael Myers is! And even though Laurie's fears are irrational, it is not wise to just dismiss the issue either. There is a killer on the loose. Why are we talking about the world being full of love and understanding? Are you fucking stupid? This makes no sense. The dialogue makes no sense at all. Radcon then finds the gas station victims, and by the look in his face, you know he knows what happened. He then confirms it to the cartoon character and says,
We have one order of business. That's to hunt this thing down.
and maybe, just maybe, put out a deranged killer on the loose on his night of choice for carnage, please don't leave your house alert. We then proceed to Halloween night, where Myers is free roaming in the streets of Haddonfield because this town has the worst police department in history. And this is funny because on Halloween 2, which takes place immediately after the first one, the victims' bodies hadn't even cooled down yet and everything was already on the news. Apparently, so far, the new killings haven't been reported yet. And this is interesting because here, they reference the movie they chose to ignore but choose not to do what that one did right. And keep in mind that the circumstances are wildly different between the two events. The media should be all over this from the moment people knew about Myers being transferred. On the first Halloween, no one knew about anything.
What happened?
Oh, somebody broke into the hardware store, probably kids.
The only one that even knew Michael Myers existed and was dangerous was Dr. Loomis. The townsfolk talked about the Myers house and Judith's murder like it were all stuff of legend, a distant story to scare the neighborhood kids.
The Myers house.
The Myers house? You're not supposed to go up there.
Yes, I am.
That's the spook house.
And then 4 people and a dog died because no one really knew what was going on, and not even the police believed Loomis that much. And honestly, you can't really blame them.
You should have told somebody. I told everybody! You can get back in there and get back on that telephone and tell him he can't drive a car. He was doing very well last night.
You must think me a very sinister doctor.
Seems to me you're just plain scared.
Yes.
But now, after the events of the original have taken place, it makes no sense at all that Haddonfield isn't freaking out about this, especially the police department. And keep in mind that we have already established twice that this story is well known around town. The only reason the first movie happened, and the second one is plausible, is because they take place on the same night, before there could be any sort of reaction to Michael Myers. And that is because Michael Myers is a mindless killing machine, nothing beyond that.
There was nothing left. No reason, no conscience, no understanding, and even the most rudimentary sense of life or death. I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Everything that happened in the first movie is incidental. All of Myers' victims were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. If you have the chance to plan ahead, inform the people through the media, make them stay inside, and put every cop at your disposal after him, it would be the shortest manhunt ever. But hey, everyone in this movie is fucking stupid, and none of this has any reason to happen other than the fact that the plot needs it to. Anyway, back to Halloween night. And despite the fact that this entire situation is ridiculously implausible, this sequence is actually great. It's fantastic if you ignore the fact that he managed to cross paths with and kill almost every single side character. This is the only part of the movie that, to me, perfectly captures the feeling of randomness I associate with Myers' killings. And the mere fact that this sequence is so well done in this sense is also very confusing to me. The entire movie is really confusing actually. It is almost as if they put the nostalgia checkpoints and the fanboying before the actual story, and the result is a disjointed mess that makes no sense. On one moment, the movie implies meaning to what Myers does. Then here, we have this amazing sequence that makes a point that he kills randomly. So what is it? Is it random or not? Anyway, we have over 10 minutes of Allie's teenage drama which no one cares about and has no purpose whatsoever, because from this point on, Cameron doesn't even appear anymore and their story goes nowhere. Then we have these two being killed in a horror comedy sequence that is not scary nor funny. What it is annoying. Every time this movie tried to make me laugh, all I got was annoyed. A character like this being in a Halloween movie is so baffling to me that I don't even know what to say about it. And about the killings, this is something that I really don't get about these nostalgia movies. What is the audience supposed to make out of this? That Michael Myers has a taste for impaling douchebags with knives and pinning them to walls? That he likes to play with sheets when killing teens? Those are rhetorical questions. I know why these killings are on the movie. These killings are on the movie so the movie can make callbacks to the first Halloween. And now here's a real question. What reaction would you possibly expect people to have when you just put random out-of-place shit like this for no reason other than the fact that it is also in the original installment? You're sacrificing the logic of your movie just to make a fucking callback. It's like we're looking at the story from outside of the movie. The film keeps winking at you every 5 minutes saying, hey, remember this from that other movie? This is deliberately bad storytelling for the sake of senseless nostalgia. Anyway, Officer Redcon and Laurie, who has been listening to the police radio, get to the house, see and participate in references to the first movie, and then the cartoon character arrives at the scene of a double teenage murder with a cheery attitude accompanied by Dr. And then we have some repeated exposition about Myers and, why are you smiling, man? Then cartoon character introduces Laurie and the doctor, and then we have some more exposition about Officer Redcon's origin. And then Laurie says,
Do you know that I pray every night that he would escape so I can kill him?
Well, it certainly didn't look that way a few nights ago, Laurie. That is not in line with anything this movie has shown us about how this woman dealt with her trauma. At the beginning of the movie, Laurie is absolutely terrified over the possibility of Myers escaping. Then after he escapes, it's like she's a completely different character. So, Radcon and Doctor are looking for Michael, and the doctor says,
I want to know what he's feeling. I want to know what pleasure he gets out of killing.
And the only acceptable response to something like this would be something like,
That's fucking crazy, man.
or at least, yo doc, that's some pretty fucked up shit you're telling me, you know? Laurie arrives at Karen's house, and Karen calls Allie and says,
They evacuated the dance and I can't get in touch with you and they're making us go to your grandmother's house because it's safe.
Why? Why does the police say it is safe at Grandma's house? Then Radcon and the doctor find Allie with some people from the neighborhood and...
I'm a doctor. Lock your doors.
What? How the hell does a line like that gets written, revised, shot in multiple takes, edited, and ends up on the final cut? This movie is bizarre. There's just no way this is not intentional. Laurie, Karen, and Moron then arrive at Laurie's house and prepare for the final showdown. Meanwhile, Officer Radcon, the doctor, and Allison find Michael, run him over, and of course he doesn't die, and BAM! The doc is an evil son of a bitch that kills Radcon because he...
I want to know what he's feeling. I want to know what pleasure he gets out of killing.
Well, at least he warned you, you fucking idiot! The one-armed elderly man then drags the giant man's body and puts it on the backseat with Allie and says,
Michael's pursuit of Laurie Strode could be what keeps him alive.
Why? Also, this is another point of the never-ending confusion in this film. So, the journalists try to imply meaning because they have to sell their story. Okay, Laurie is crazy and thinks Michael Myers is coming for her. Okay, the doctor is crazy and he thinks there is some sort of meaning behind Michael Myers and Laurie Strode. That's okay too. Karen, Allie, and the level-headed people in this movie think this is all crazy talk. The movie, in turn, seems to not know what the fuck it wants to say. They do this, but also do this, and this. Then what the fuck is it? What are you trying to convey to your audience? Is there supposed to be meaning or is it all supposed to be random? I don't know, and I don't think they know or care about it either. And you know why? Because it doesn't matter to them or the audience they're going for. And this annoys me because when they try to imply meaning, they commit what I think is part 2's worst sin, which is removing the randomness of the killings. What I find really interesting about this discussion is that except for this scene, the movie seems to have the same opinion as the crazies.
Now, a banh mi sandwich. Banh mi is essentially just the Vietnamese version of a French baguette.
Mm-hmm.
And the term actually refers to the bread and not so much the content.
Wow! Dr. Crazy and Allie are on their way to Laurie's house, and I'm not even going to go over this dialogue because nothing they say makes any sense and the movie doesn't give us any reason to care about any of it. Michael then wakes up, deals with the situation, and Allie runs into the woods. Fuck you! Back at the house, Karen says,
I thought you said we were safer here.
well, maybe you shouldn't have taken the word of the person you have been calling crazy since the beginning of the film seriously, Karen. And as Allie runs through the woods and Laurie prepares for evil's arrival, I sit on the edge of my seat feeling a shred of real anticipation for the first and only time in the film. But that only makes this entire movie even more frustrating, because this final battle is fucking amazing. You see, there's nothing wrong in making references or injecting some nostalgia in your revival. But it can never take the wheel of your story or be done so obnoxiously that it takes the audience out of the movie. This entire battle sequence, for example, is a giant subversion of the last battle in part 1. She looks for him in the closet, she attacks him with a knife, she vanishes from the front yard, she appears out of the shadows, and all of it works perfectly. It still feels like a battle, a meaningful fight, and Laurie comes out like a fucking badass at the end. And all of it, unfortunately, just make everything even more frustrating because the writers had a very nice idea for the story but came out with a terrible plot that is almost entirely nonsensical and out of place nostalgia interspersed with very, and I can't stress this enough, very bad filler. Seriously, this movie has one of the worst dialogue I have ever seen. The editing doesn't help, and I really can't shake the feeling that the final product is a poorly stitched movie made out of different versions of the script where they didn't bother to make the necessary changes in order for it to have the slightest bit of coherence. Had they done this right, they could have their scarred Laurie have her final revenge on the monster who ruined her life so many years ago. The ending with Michael burning inside the basement would be a nice homage to John Carpenter himself, ending once and for all the terror of Michael Myers, just like Carpenter had begrudgingly envisioned for part 2. Because even though this movie is shit, this is a good ending for the story, a definitive end. But hey, when it rains it pours, right? With 2 more films on the way for this latest trilogy, both of them being done with these 2
big Halloween fans
at the helm, and with Myers somehow surviving this, and I know Halloween Kills is already out, but I'm obviously not gonna see that shit because I just don't care.
Evil dies tonight!
The Halloween franchise continues to suffer this never-ending abuse at the hands of money-grabbing talentless hacks who either don't understand the material, just don't care, or, and this is the worst case scenario for me, know what they are doing and choose to do shit like this on purpose. A fan service drenched, horribly written, reference-guided, terrible nostalgia fest that only appeals to people who like the idea of liking Halloween. The same people who love the latest Star Wars trilogy because it had the name Star Wars in it. This is not Luke Skywalker. This is not Han Solo. These are not Star Wars. This is not Kirk. This is not Spock. These are not Star Trek. This is not Watchmen. And this is not Halloween. You may have the titles, you may have the names, but these are not the characters or the stories. This is fan fiction. Fan fiction made by arrogant, entitled people who think they are free to mess with these properties without any concern for integrity or continuity and do whatever the fuck they want with them just because they can. You know, when The Force Awakens was released in 2015, I thought it was really weird that they had basically remade A New Hope with new characters. And even though it already had some of the issues that would become really bad problems in the 2 subsequent films, I thought it was a clever way of giving old fans what they wanted while still drawing in young audiences into the Star Wars universe. It made sense then. But now we have all these movies that call themselves sequels, but are just a bunch of callbacks, fan service, and reference and almost remakes of old films. And what the fuck do we need those for? If you are trying to sell me a sequel, then make a fucking sequel. Do it like David Lynch with the Twin Peaks revival. Go on with your stories and your characters. To me, Halloween doesn't need any kind of sequel. They have already said and done everything they needed in part 1. Does that mean that I think it's impossible for us to have a worthy sequel? Oh no. It's possible. This latest incarnation itself had a great premise, and even if it didn't, any story can work if you tell it right. In the wrong hands though, nothing works and a great premise doesn't go anywhere. But then again, I don't even know where these people's intentions were. Maybe this cynic piece of trash is what they intended all along. Maybe this was all incompetence. I don't know. And at this point, I frankly don't care.